My name is Loretta Mae Carter, 63 years old, born and raised on the south side of Atlanta, Georgia. For most of my life, I've been the woman who held everyone else together, the mother who sold her dreams so her son could chase his. I taught third grade for 30 years, buried my husband Harold with my own trembling hands, and thought I'd already survived every kind of heartbreak this world could hand me. But nothing prepared me for the sound of my own son's voice saying, "Sevens, Mama, you should probably find somewhere else to stay." Sevens. That sentence split my life clean in two. If you're watching this, take a moment before you scroll. Tell me where you're from, and if life has ever blindsided you in a way that left you standing there, holding your own breath. Because that's where my story begins. Right there in the garage, I'd turned into a small home after selling my old house to help my son Deshaun and his wife Tasha buy theirs. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day you forget until it changes everything. Tasha was 6 months pregnant. Deshaun was tired from work, and I was just folding laundry when she looked up from her phone and said the words that would shatter the quiet. "Sevens, Loretta, we need the garage for the nursery." Sevens. And just like that, I became homeless in my own family's home. When people ask about my family, I usually smile and say, "It's just me and my boy." What I don't say is how hard those words were earned. I raised Deshaun alone after his father, Harold Carter, passed from a heart attack when our son was 10. I worked 2 jobs, teaching by day, tutoring by night, just to keep the lights on and the boy in school. We didn't have much, but we had love, Sunday dinners, and an old 3-story house in East Point, filled with Harold's jazz records and my mother's photographs. That house was more than wood and paint. It was our heartbeat. So when Deshaun married Tasha Reed, I did what mothers do. I gave up everything for his fresh start. I sold that house, the only piece of Harold I had left, and handed them a check for $150,000 to help with the down payment on their new place in Midtown. They promised I'd always have a home there, that I'd never have to worry. And for a while, I believed them. I cooked, cleaned, and turned their garage into a cozy little apartment, paying rent like a tenant but praying like a mother. Every morning, I'd hear them laughing upstairs, and I'd whisper to Harold's picture, "We did good, honey. Our boy's all right." Sevens. I didn't know then that love, when taken for granted, can turn into something colder than silence. The day everything cracked open started like any other. Georgia sunlight pouring through half-closed blinds, the hum of traffic outside, and the smell of cornbread cooling on the counter. I was folding tiny baby onesies, feeling grateful just to help. Upstairs, I could hear Tasha's voice through the floorboards, sharp and restless, arguing about color palettes for the nursery. I remember thinking, she's just stressed. Pregnancy will do that to you. Then the footsteps came. Slow, deliberate. The kind you hear when someone's made up their mind. Tasha appeared in the doorway, her hand resting on her belly, her phone still glowing in her palm. She didn't even look at me when she spoke. "Loretta, we need the garage back. The baby can't sleep out here with all that noise from the street." Sevens. Her words hung in the air like smoke. I looked at her, this young woman I'd cooked for, prayed for, helped through morning sickness, and waited for a sign of kindness. Nothing. Just the soft click of her acrylic nails against her phone screen. Deshaun came down a minute later, eyes fixed on the floor. "Mama," he said quietly, "maybe it's time you find your own place. Just until things settle." Sevens. Just until. That's how people make forever sound temporary. I felt the sting rise in my chest, but I swallowed it. 30 years of teaching children taught me that silence can be stronger than shouting. So I nodded, folded the last onesie, and said, "Sevens. All right, baby. I'll be out by the weekend." Sevens. They both seemed relieved. Relieved that the problem had solved itself. What they didn't see was the quiet steel forming inside me. They thought they were sending me away. What they were really doing was setting me free. And in that moment, as I closed the garage door behind me, I whispered to myself, "Sevens, you might have just pushed the wrong woman out into the world." Sevens. I packed that night, with the same calm I used to handle a classroom full of third graders. No tears, no drama, just quiet hands folding quiet memories. The garage that once felt like a sanctuary now looked like a holding cell. Every corner reminded me how small I'd made myself to fit into someone else's life. I remember hearing laughter upstairs while I zipped my suitcase. It wasn't cruel laughter, not on purpose, but it carried that easy comfort of people who believed their problem had just walked itself out the door. I paused for a moment, my hand resting on a framed photo of Deshaun when he was 6, holding his first baseball glove, eyes bright with hope. I pressed the glass against my lips and whispered, "You'll understand one day, baby." Sevens. When I stepped outside, the Atlanta night hit me like a wall of warm rain. The cicadas were singing, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn wailed, a sound that had always reminded me of change. My neighbor, old Miss Janey, called from her porch, "Loretta, you movin' somewhere nice?" I smiled and said, "Somewhere peaceful." It was the truth, even if I didn't yet know where that was. As I drove away, headlights catching the edge of their front porch, I caught a glimpse of Tasha standing by the window, arms folded across her stomach. No wave, no goodbye. Just 2 women staring at each other through glass and pride. I didn't cry. Not that night. My heart had already done its grieving months ago. Every time she dismissed my help, every time my son stayed silent. That night, I made myself a promise. I would never again live in a space where I had to ask permission to exist. Atlanta spread out before me. Bright lights, endless roads, a city that knew how to rebuild itself after being burned to the ground. As I merged onto I-285, I whispered to the dark, "If this city can rise again, so can I." Sevens. I didn't know it yet, but that drive out of Midtown was the beginning of everything I was meant to become. The next morning, I woke up in a cheap motel off Cascade Road, the kind where the vending machine still eats your quarters, and the air smells faintly of bleach and cigarettes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. For the first time in months, no one was knocking on the door, asking where the clean towels were or what's for dinner. Just me, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and the hum of my own breathing. I thought about the road that had led me there. 30 years of teaching other people's children how to spell respect, yet somehow forgetting how to demand it for myself. Selling the only home I'd ever loved so that Deshaun and Tasha could start fresh. I'd signed those papers with pride, telling everyone at church, "My boy's moving up in the world." Folks clapped me on the back, called me blessed. They didn't see the ache behind my smile. the kind that comes from knowing you just traded memories for mortgage money. I could still picture that house in East Point. The big oak tree Harold planted the year we married. The porch swing he built for me, painted soft blue like the sky before summer rain. Every brick in that house carried his laughter. Selling it had felt like selling the last piece of him. But I did it anyway, because that's what mothers do. We give until there's nothing left but the echo of our own generosity. Lying in that motel bed, I realized I'd done something dangerous. I'd built my whole identity around being needed, and the moment they didn't need me, I disappeared. So I grabbed my notebook, the one I used to keep lesson plans in, and started writing a new kind of list. Not spelling words or attendance notes this time, but possibilities. Find a job. Get a place. Breathe again. Sevens. And somewhere between those bullet points, I wrote something I hadn't written in years. Sevens. Remember who Loretta Mae Carter is. Sevens. Because for the first time in a long time, I was starting to believe I might still find out. 2 days later, while I was sipping weak motel coffee and flipping through the classifieds, the universe decided to show off its sense of timing. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Area code 92. Mrs. Carter, a woman's voice said, polite but professional. This is Denise Parker from Wright Development Group. We're reviewing a few land titles in Savannah, and your name came up. Do you happen to own a parcel near Little River? Sevens. I nearly dropped the phone. That land had been my parents', a patch of Georgia soil we'd left untouched for decades. Nothing but pine trees, sand, and memories of picnics when I was a girl. Denise continued. Our CEO, Mr. Caleb Wright, is interested in acquiring and developing that area. He's particularly keen to work with legacy landowners, especially families from the community. Sevens. It took me a second to catch my breath. So, you're saying my little piece of dirt might actually be worth something? Sevens. She laughed softly. More than something, ma'am. Mr. Wright would like to meet you in person. Sevens. When we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall, heart thudding. My daddy used to tell me, Loretta Mae, never sell what was given in love unless you're ready to turn it into a blessing. Maybe this was that moment. The next day, I drove down to the company's office on Peachtree Street, hands shaking just a little. It was one of those sleek glass buildings that look like they don't even breathe the same air as the rest of us. But inside, everyone treated me with the kind of respect I hadn't felt in a long, long time. And then I met Caleb Wright. Tall, confident, a voice like gospel on Sunday morning. He didn't talk down to me. He talked to me. Mrs. Carter, he said, I believe your land could be the cornerstone of something special. Sevens. For the first time since leaving my son's house, I felt it again. That rare, steady warmth of being seen. Not as a burden. Not as somebody's mother, but as a woman who still had something powerful to offer. That meeting changed everything. What I thought would be a quick handshake turned into a 2-hour conversation about community, heritage, and rebuilding the parts of Atlanta that history had forgotten. Caleb Wright wasn't just buying land. He was building a legacy. And somehow, he saw one in me, too. He asked about my parents, about the summers I spent on that Savannah property, about what I wanted my name to stand for. No one had asked me that in years. I told him about Harold, about raising Deshawn alone, about selling our East Point home to help the kids. Caleb listened, really listened, then leaned back and said, "Mrs. Carter, that's the kind of strength we need guiding this project. You know what this land means to people like us." Sevens. A week later, the paperwork was done. My little slice of inherited dirt sold for $1 million, and with it came an unexpected offer. A consulting role with Right Development. "You understand these neighborhoods," Caleb said. "You know the difference between building houses and building hope." Sevens. When I left the office, the city looked different. Not bigger or smaller, just open, like there was finally room for me again. I took myself to a diner on Auburn Avenue, same one Harold and I used to go to after Sunday service. Ordered fried catfish and a slice of sweet potato pie, and let the news sink in. Somewhere between the first bite and the last crumb, I laughed out loud. Not the bitter kind, but the belly-deep kind that surprises you. All those years of giving, of being overlooked, of shrinking down to fit other people's lives. They hadn't broken me. They'd refined me. I left that diner with a full stomach, a new job, and a simple vow whispered to the night air over Atlanta. Sevens. From now on, Loretta Mae Carter doesn't beg for a seat at the table. She builds her own. Sevens. My first week with Right Development Group felt like stepping into another world. The office buzzed with ambition. Young architects in crisp suits, engineers mapping out blueprints, and the faint smell of roasted coffee that never seemed to fade. I wasn't there to file papers or fetch coffee. Caleb made that clear from day one. "Loretta," he said, with that warm, steady confidence of his, "I hired you because you know people, not because you know policy." Sevens. And he was right. I knew how neighborhoods breathed. The rhythm of Sunday church bells, the aunties who kept the block alive with gossip and prayer, the kids chasing each other through sprinklers when the Georgia heat got mean. That was the heartbeat I understood. So when Caleb handed me a folder labeled Midtown Redevelopment Phase 2, I didn't think much of it, until I saw the address. 742 Briarwood Lane. My breath caught in my throat. That was Deshawn and Tasha's house. For a moment, the office faded away. All I could see was that garage where I'd folded tiny baby clothes, that kitchen window where Tasha once stood, looking down at me like I was hired help. Caleb's voice brought me back. "This one's a priority," he said. "The city's planning to rezone the whole block. Some of these homes have code issues, unpermitted additions, structural stuff. We'll need an assessment before making any offers." Sevens. Unpermitted additions. My stomach tightened. The garage conversion Deshawn and his friend had done without a single city permit flashed in my mind. I closed the folder slowly and forced a small smile. "Don't worry, Mr. Right. I know that property better than anyone." Sevens. He chuckled, not realizing how true that was. As I walked out of his office that day, Atlanta's skyline gleamed through the windows like a challenge. Fate had a funny way of circling back. I wasn't sure if this was payback or providence, but either way, it was my move now. The following Friday, Caleb asked me to join him for an on-site inspection of several Midtown properties. When we pulled up to 742 Briarwood Lane, I swear my pulse skipped a beat. The house looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe it was just the weight of memory pressing down. The magnolia tree out front was blooming, bright, defiant, and almost mocking. "Nice place," Caleb said as he grabbed his clipboard. Young couple, right? This block has potential, but the structure looks improvised. Sevens. Improvised. If only he knew. As we walked up the driveway, the front door opened. There stood Tasha, 7 months pregnant now, wearing one of those silk robes that looked expensive and uncomfortable at the same time. For a second, she froze, like her brain was buffering. Then her lips parted in disbelief. Mrs. Carter, she said, her voice cracking just a little. Before I could answer, Deshaun appeared behind her, still in his work clothes, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes met mine, and I saw it. Shame, confusion, maybe even fear. Caleb extended his hand. Good morning. Caleb Wright, Wright Development Group. We're conducting assessments for the city's redevelopment plan. This is my consultant, Mrs. Loretta Mae Carter. Sevens. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Tasha blinked fast, trying to keep her composure. Consultant, she repeated, voice tight as piano wire. Yes, ma'am, Caleb said cheerfully, oblivious to the hurricane brewing between us. Mrs. Carter's been instrumental in helping us identify properties with potential. Sevens. Deshaun swallowed hard. I could almost hear his thoughts spinning. Standing there, clipboard in hand, I felt the old hurt rise in me like a tide. But I smiled, professional, polite, unbothered. May we come in? I asked gently. I believe this visit might be enlightening. Sevens. Caleb nodded, stepping forward. And as the 3 of us crossed that threshold, me, my son, and the woman who'd called me useless, something inside me settled. Not anger, not revenge, just the quiet certainty that, for the first time, I was walking into this house on my own terms. Inside, everything looked staged. White candles, beige furniture, a perfectly curated home that didn't feel lived in. I remembered when I used to dust those same shelves, back when my presence wasn't something to be hidden. Now, even the air felt expensive. Caleb set down his tablet on the marble counter, his voice smooth and professional. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, he began. The city's planning major infrastructure upgrades. New sewage, broadband fiber, zoning adjustments. Wright Development is offering select homeowners early buyout options to minimize disruption. Sevens. He glanced at me, and I could tell he was waiting for my cue. I kept my tone calm, steady. Your property, in particular, could qualify for a fast-track purchase. $600,000, cash offer, 30-day close. Sevens. Tasha's face lit up for half a second before her expression hardened. We're not selling, she said sharply. We just bought this house last year. Sevens. Caleb nodded politely. Of course. You're under no obligation. I should mention, though, that preliminary inspections indicate a few potential code issues, specifically a converted garage that might not have been properly permitted. Sevens. The silence that followed was deafening. Deshaun shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to me. He knew exactly what Caleb meant. That garage was my former space, the one I helped them convert, without a single city permit. Tasha's confidence cracked. That can't be true, she said, her voice trembling. Everything was done by the book. Sevens. Caleb handed her a polite smile. Then you'll have no problem providing the paperwork. Sevens. I looked at her, this woman who once told me I was in the way, and felt no glee, no vengeance, just a strange, deep calm. Sometimes, I said softly, we build things fast to make life look pretty. But when the foundation isn't right, it always comes back to haunt us. Sevens. Tasha's hand gripped the countertop. Deshaun couldn't even look at me. Caleb closed his tablet, oblivious to the storm behind him. We'll give you the weekend to think about it, he said pleasantly. As we stepped back outside, I took one last glance at that house, their dream, my sacrifice, and thought, funny how karma doesn't rush, but it always shows up on time. The minute we got back in the car, Caleb started running numbers, talking about appraisals and zoning permits, but I barely heard him. My mind was still standing in that kitchen, the one I used to mop after dinner, the one where I once listened to my son laugh. Now all I could hear was silence, heavy and sour. By the time we reached the right development office, Caleb finally looked over and said, "You okay, Mrs. Carter? You went real quiet back there." Sevens. I gave him a small smile. Just thinking, Mr. Right. Some lessons take longer to learn than others. Sevens. He nodded, respectful as ever, and went inside to debrief the team. I sat in the parking lot for a long while, watching people rush past, young interns with coffee cups, delivery drivers, mothers juggling toddlers. Everyone moving, everyone with somewhere to go. I thought about Deshaun, how I'd raised him to be kind, to stand tall, to protect what's right. And now, he'd stood by while his wife dismissed the woman who made him. The ache in my chest wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity, the kind that burns but cleans. That night, back in my apartment, I poured a glass of sweet tea and opened my journal. I wrote down every thought that had been gnawing at me since the day I left that garage. How love without boundaries becomes servitude, how silence can be both dignity and danger, and how sometimes you have to let people fall to understand what held them up. The next morning, I sent Caleb an email with my full assessment report. Factual, professional, airtight. I didn't sugarcoat the truth. Unpermitted structural modification, I wrote, likely to trigger compliance review. Sevens. Then I added one final line that wasn't required but felt necessary. Sevens. Recommend prioritizing property owner education on accountability and community impact. Sevens. I hit send, sat back, and let out a long breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to life. I was directing it. And deep down, I knew. The real reckoning for Deshaun and Tasha hadn't even started yet. That weekend, my phone started buzzing like a hive. First Deshaun, then Tasha, then a number I didn't recognize, but knew in my bones was hers calling from a different line. I didn't answer any of them. Atlanta was glowing outside my window, rain misting the glass, traffic humming like distant thunder. I just sat there with my tea and the gospel station playing low, letting the sound of Mahalia Jackson remind me that peace is a choice. By Sunday evening, they showed up in person. I saw the outline of Tasha's SUV through the peephole before the first knock. Her face was swollen from crying, her belly round beneath her sweatshirt. I opened the door halfway. "Loretta, please," she said, voice breaking. "I know we did you wrong. I know I said things I shouldn't have. But this is too much. They're saying we could lose the house." Sevens. Behind her, Deshaun hovered, hands shoved in his pockets, looking like the boy he used to be when he'd broken something and didn't know how to fix it. I took a slow breath. I didn't make your choices for you, baby. I just stopped cleaning up after them. Sevens. Tasha stepped closer, eyes wide. You're really going to let this happen? To your own son. To your grandbaby. Sevens. That one hit hard, but I didn't flinch. Family doesn't mean blind loyalty, Tasha. It means doing right, even when it hurts. Sevens. She looked down, shoulders shaking. Deshaun finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Mama, we need your help. Please. Sevens. I studied their faces. Fear, pride, desperation, all tangled up. Then I said softly, You want help? Start by owning what you did. Sevens. The silence stretched until Tasha whispered, We used you. Sevens. That was the truth I'd waited months to hear. I nodded slowly. And now, maybe you'll learn what it costs to treat love like labor. Sevens. I closed the door gently, not to shut them out, but to let them sit with their own echoes. Sometimes the hardest lessons need quiet to sink in. By midweek, the situation had taken on a life of its own. Word travels fast in Atlanta, especially when it comes to property and pride. Robert and Clarice Reed, Tasha's parents, called and asked if they could stop by for a friendly chat. I already knew what that meant. Damage control wrapped in Southern politeness. They arrived the next afternoon, Robert in a pressed suit that smelled faintly of cigar smoke, Clarice with a pie she probably hadn't baked herself. Loretta, honey, Clarice started, her smile a little too bright. We just came to clear the air. The kids are under so much stress with the baby coming. Sevens. I poured coffee, listened, and waited. Robert leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the way men do when they're trying to look sincere. Look, he said, I understand there's been some miscommunication. Maybe we can all work this out quietly. Tasha's scared. Deshaun's embarrassed. You know how young folks get. Sevens. I met his gaze. Do you know what they did, Robert? They put me out of a house I helped pay for. They treated me like a stranger, in my own bloodline. Sevens. His jaw tightened. I heard their side. Sevens. Then you only know half the story. Sevens. I walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a folder I'd kept tucked away, the original sale documents from my East Point home, the transfer record showing my contribution to their down payment, and the notice about the unpermitted garage conversion I'd quietly tried to fix before Tasha threw me out. Clarice's hand went to her mouth as I laid each paper on the table. I was handling it, I said softly. I was going to get everything up to code before the city ever came knocking. But when they decided I wasn't good enough to share their space, I stopped protecting them. Sevens. Robert's face fell. The weight of the truth sat between us like a third cup of coffee no one wanted to touch. Finally, he nodded slowly. You're right, Loretta. They brought this on themselves. Sevens. As they left, Clarice touched my arm. For what it's worth, you handled this better than I would have. Sevens. I smiled, tired but steady. That's because I stopped reacting like a mother and started thinking like a woman who knows her worth. Sevens. A few days later, just when I thought things had settled, the phone rang again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was crisp, official. Mrs. Loretta Mae Carter. This is Detective Sarah Chen with the City Planning Compliance Office. We'd like to schedule an interview regarding your consulting work with Right Development Group. Sevens. My stomach dropped. I straightened in my chair. Interview? Is there a problem? Sevens. There's been a formal complaint filed, she said. Allegations of intimidation tactics used to pressure residents into selling their homes. Your name came up as a consultant on several properties, including 742 Briarwood Lane. Sevens. I didn't need to ask who filed it. Only one man in this city had both the ego and the connections to stir up a storm that fast. Robert Reed. I understand, I said evenly. When and where would you like to meet? Sevens. The next morning, I found myself sitting in a small gray room at City Hall, the kind where even the air smells like bureaucracy. Detective Chen was younger than I expected. Sharp eyes, calm tone. She clicked her pen once before starting. Mrs. Carter, can you explain your relationship with Right Development? Sevens. I'm a community consultant, I replied. I help identify properties that could benefit from redevelopment. Sevens. And your relationship to Deshawn and Tasha Carter. Sevens. My son and daughter-in-law. Sevens. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. And you recommended their home for acquisition. Sevens. I didn't recommend it, I said carefully. I confirmed what the city already knew, that their property had unpermitted structural changes. My job was to report facts, not feelings. Sevens. She studied me for a long moment, then set her pen down. Some would say that sounds personal. Sevens. I met her gaze. Personal would have been keeping quiet to protect them. Professional was telling the truth. Sevens. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, Detective Chen stood, her expression softening. Off the record, Mrs. Carter, this is one of the cleanest files I've reviewed. I think you'll be fine. Sevens. I nodded, clutching my purse tight. Detective, I said quietly, sometimes doing right looks wrong to the people who've always benefited from your silence. Sevens. And as I walked out of City Hall, I knew that silence, my old armor, had finally been replaced by something far stronger. Conviction. 3 days later, Caleb Wright called while I was watering my little balcony garden. Loretta, he said, his voice bright with relief. The city's cleared us. No violations, no coercion, nothing. The investigation's officially closed. Sevens. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So, they dropped the complaint? Sevens. Withdrawn, he confirmed. Apparently, Robert Reed made some calls this morning, apologizing to the city for the misunderstanding. Seems he had a long talk with his daughter last night. Sevens. I smiled faintly. Good. Maybe they finally learned the difference between intimidation and accountability. Sevens. Caleb chuckled. I don't know what you said to them, but whatever it was, it worked. Sevens. After we hung up, I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the city drifting up from below. The rhythm of cars, the laughter of kids, the heartbeat of Atlanta that never stopped moving. I wasn't angry anymore. Just still. That peace lasted until I heard the knock on my door later that afternoon. Through the peephole, I saw Deshawn and Tasha, both looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. She held her stomach with one hand, the other clutching his arm. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. When I opened the door, neither of them spoke right away. Finally, Deshawn whispered, "Mama, we owe you an apology." Sevens. Tasha nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. "We didn't just hurt you," she said softly. "We disrespected everything you gave us. And when it all fell apart, you were still the only one who stood strong." Sevens. I didn't say anything at first. I just let the silence stretch between us, long enough for them to feel its weight. Then I said, "The thing about forgiveness is, it's not about forgetting what someone did. It's about remembering who you are while you forgive them." Sevens. They both nodded, eyes red, shoulders heavy. "I can forgive you," I added, my voice steady. "But from now on, forgiveness doesn't mean rescue. It means responsibility." Sevens. As they left, the evening light caught the photo of Harold on my mantel. His smile seemed to say, "You did good, Loretta." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. The weeks that followed were quiet in that uneasy way peace feels after a storm. I went back to work, back to morning walks through Piedmont Park, back to sleeping through the night without my phone lighting up at 2 a.m. with someone else's emergency. But still, every once in a while, I'd glance at the picture of Deshawn on my dresser and wonder if forgiveness alone could rebuild what they'd broken. Then one Sunday afternoon, while the radio hummed Al Green and the sunlight turned my living room gold, I heard another knock. It was softer this time, hesitant. When I opened the door, Deshawn stood there alone. No Tasha, no rehearsed apologies. Just my boy, looking like the weight of the world had finally found him. "Mama," he said, voice trembling. "We lost the house." Sevens. I felt my heart pull tight, but I didn't rush to fill the silence. He went on. "Between the code violations and the penalties, we couldn't keep up. We sold it to Right Development. Caleb was fair. We came out okay, but it's gone." Sevens. He rubbed his hands together, staring at the floor like a child again. "Tasha's staying with her parents for now. Baby's due any week." He finally looked up, eyes glassy. "Mama, I don't even know where to start fixing things." Sevens. I stepped closer, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You start by not running from what hurts," I said quietly. "You face it, learn from it, and you do better next time." Sevens. He nodded, wiping his eyes. "You think we'll ever be a family again?" Sevens. I smiled, a little sad but sincere. "We always were, Deshawn. We just forgot what it meant." Sevens. As he left, I stood by the window watching him walk away, his figure small against the wide Atlanta sky. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry or used, just proud. Proud that maybe, just maybe, my son was starting to remember who raised him. 2 weeks later, I got another call, this time from Clarice Reed. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Loretta, honey," she said, "Tasha had the baby. A little girl, 7 pounds even. They named her Hope." Sevens. For a moment, I couldn't speak. That name hit me straight in the chest. Hope. Maybe the Lord really does have a sense of humor. "They'd like you to come by," Clarice continued. "Tasha's been different since the birth. She keeps asking for you." Sevens. I hesitated. Pride is a tricky thing. It'll convince you to stay put when love's telling you to move. But that night, I baked a peach cobbler, wrapped it in foil the way my mama used to, and drove across town to the Reed's house. When I stepped inside, everything smelled like antiseptic and baby powder. Tasha was on the couch, pale and tired, but softer somehow. She looked up, tears already in her eyes. "Loretta," she whispered, "I'm sorry." Truly. Sevens. I nodded, setting the cobbler on the table. You've already said that, baby. The question is, are you going to live like you mean it? Sevens. She reached for the bundle in her arms and held it out to me. Would you like to meet your granddaughter? Sevens. The tiny thing blinked up at me, brown eyes wide, a tuft of soft curls crowning her head. My hands shook as I took her. Hey there, little Hope, I said, my voice breaking. You don't know it yet, but you're the reason this whole family's getting another chance. Sevens. Tasha started to cry again, quietly this time. Deshawn came in from the kitchen, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. We didn't need words. The baby's steady breathing filled the silence like a hymn. Standing there in that living room, holding the newest Carter in my arms, I realized something simple but powerful. Forgiveness isn't a door you open once. It's a porch light you keep on, in case somebody finally decides to come home. 3 months later, Atlanta was in full bloom again. Magnolias bursting open like small miracles, kids riding bikes down cracked sidewalks, and the smell of barbecue drifting through every neighborhood. Life, as it always does, kept moving forward. That's when I made my own quiet move. I drove back to East Point, to the block where my life had started and unraveled all at once. The old Carter house was still there, though the paint was peeling, and the porch swing Harold built hung crooked, creaking in the wind. I sat in my car for a long moment before stepping out. The "for sale" sign out front had been there for weeks. I'd seen it online, but hadn't let myself believe it until now. I walked up to the porch, hand brushing the railings, wood, rough under my fingers but familiar, like an old friend who'd been waiting patiently for me to come home. 2 weeks later, the papers were signed. Loretta Mae Carter, homeowner once again. The same walls that had heard Harold's laughter, the same kitchen where Deshawn had taken his first steps. They were mine now, restored not out of desperation, but out of hard-earned peace. When the movers left, I stood in the middle of that sunlit living room, holding a framed photo of Harold. We did it, baby, I whispered. We found our way back. Sevens. That weekend, Deshawn, Tasha, and baby Hope came by. The house filled with the sound of life again. Hope's giggles, Tasha's laughter that no longer sounded forced, and Deshawn's voice reading baby books from Harold's old armchair. As the evening light faded through the windows, I sat on the porch swing, Hope nestled against my chest, the sky painted in soft orange and lavender. I realized something then. The house had never just been a place. It was a promise that no matter how far we wander, love will always find a way to bring us home. And for the first time in years, everything felt right. Not perfect, just right. And that was enough. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I once taught Deshawn how to make Harold's famous gumbo. The clock ticked softly, and a faint breeze moved through the open window, carrying the sound of laughter from the neighbor's porch. I poured myself a small glass of sweet tea, sat back, and let the weight of the last year settle over me like a warm quilt. It's funny how life circles back. A year ago, I was standing outside this very house, handing over the keys and telling myself I'd never belong here again. Now, the same walls that once echoed with goodbye were filled with the soft cooing of my granddaughter. That's not luck. That's grace. As I looked around, I noticed how the shadows of the magnolia tree danced across the floorboards Harold had laid by hand. He'd always said, "Loretta, one day, this house will teach our boy what roots really mean." He was right. It just took a little longer than either of us expected. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the silence, the heartbreak, and realized none of it had destroyed me. It had refined me, made me see that love isn't about sacrifice without limit. It's about respect with boundaries. Before heading to bed, I wrote a note and taped it inside the kitchen cabinet, the same one where I used to keep Harold's spices. It read, "Sevens. Dear Hope, Sevens. If you ever feel lost, come back here. This house holds every story that made you. Your family learned how to love better within these walls. Grandma Loretta." Sevens. Then I turned off the lights, the glow of the city flickering faintly through the windows, and smiled. Because after all the storms, all the tears, and all the lessons, I finally understood the truth my mama had tried to teach me years ago. Sevens. Being family isn't about what you're willing to endure. It's about what you're willing to require. Sevens. And with that, I whispered a quiet thank you to Harold, to God, and even to the pain that led me home. Spring rolled into Atlanta like a soft hymn. Warm rain tapping on the windows, the smell of honeysuckle sneaking through the air, and the sound of laughter floating across front porches again. My little house in East Point looked alive in a way it hadn't for decades. Fresh paint gleamed on the porch railings, flower pots lined the steps, and for the first time since Harold passed, I woke up to joy instead of noise. Every Sunday, Deshawn, Tasha, and baby Hope came by like clockwork. It wasn't guilt bringing them anymore. It was love. The kind that grows quieter, humbler, wiser after it's been broken. Tasha would fuss over the biscuits, always apologizing when they came out too hard. Deshawn would fix things around the house that didn't even need fixing, just so he could be useful again. And little Hope. She was the music in it all. One afternoon, while Tasha was pouring sweet tea, and Deshawn was showing Hope how to chase fireflies in the yard, I stood at the kitchen sink watching them. The same window where I used to pray for my family to come home, now framed them laughing together in the sunlight. It hit me then. God had answered my prayer, just not the way I expected. Sometimes, you have to lose something completely before you can see its worth. After dinner, Deshawn slipped an envelope into my hand. "Open it later," he said, sheepish like a boy again. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "Sevens. Mama, this house has your name on the deed again. We used some of the money from the sale to help with the taxes. It's yours. Always should have been." My throat tightened as I looked up at him, eyes wet with something between pride and disbelief. "You didn't have to," I whispered. "I know," he said, smiling softly. "But it was time we learned what giving back really means." Sevens. The porch light flickered on behind them as the sun set, casting the whole yard in gold. I thought of Harold then, of every sacrifice and every tear, and I whispered to the sky, "Sevens, you were right, baby." He found his way back. Sevens. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, forgiveness, and the smell of home cooking, I realized sometimes healing doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in Sunday dinners, baby giggles, and the quiet return of people who finally learned how to love right. It was a warm Saturday evening when I decided to host a little cookout. Nothing fancy, just family, food, and forgiveness simmering in the Georgia air. The grill Harold had built decades ago still stood sturdy in the backyard, smoke rising from it like an old friend greeting the sky. Deshaun handled the cooking this time, determined to prove he'd inherited his daddy's magic touch with barbecue. "Not too much sauce, son," I teased from the porch. "Your father believed the meat should do the talking." "Sevens," he laughed, flipping the ribs with the same careful hands that used to build toy airplanes at our kitchen table. Tasha was inside setting out plates, humming along to the old Motown playlist I'd put on. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was sincere, and for the first time, I realized how much that mattered. When the sun started to dip low, turning everything gold, we sat down to eat. The laughter came easy. The air was thick with the scent of hickory smoke, collard greens, and cornbread, but what really filled the space was peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't need to be explained. At one point, Tasha reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Loretta," she said quietly, "I never thanked you for giving us another chance." "Sevens," I smiled, eyes soft. "Sweetheart, life's too short to hold on to old wounds. But I do expect you to keep learning from them." "Sevens," she nodded, blinking back tears. Deshaun raised his glass of sweet tea and said, "To second chances, and to the woman who never stopped believing we could do better." Sevens. Everyone clinked glasses, even little Hope, who just giggled and copied her daddy's motion with her sippy cup. Later that night, after they'd gone home and the house had gone still, I sat on the porch swing, the same one Harold built when we first moved here. The wood creaked beneath me, steady and familiar. Fireflies danced across the yard, tiny sparks of light in the dark, like reminders that even in the quiet, life keeps glowing. I thought about how far we'd come, from betrayal to belonging, from pain to peace, and it struck me how healing isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't crash in like thunder. It tiptoes in, one shared meal at a time. I looked out at the magnolia tree and whispered to myself, "Sevens, this is what love looks like when it's finally done growing up." Sevens. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a woman restored. Summer arrived with its heavy Georgia heat, the kind that makes the air shimmer and the lemonade taste sweeter. My house in East Point had never looked better. New paint on the porch, roses blooming along the fence, and the faint sound of gospel music drifting from the radio inside. But what made it feel truly alive wasn't the repairs or the sunlight. It was the sound of little Hope's footsteps pattering across the hardwood floors. Every afternoon, she'd toddle from room to room, touching everything with the curiosity only a child could have. Sometimes she'd stop at the old framed photo of Harold, her tiny finger pointing at him as if she knew. "Papa," she'd say in her baby voice. And just like that, my heart would melt all over again. One evening, after Tasha and Deshawn had finished dinner and the house had gone quiet, I stood in the doorway of what used to be Harold's study, now transformed into a playroom for Hope. Her toys were scattered everywhere. Dolls, blocks, and one of those toy pianos that never plays in tune. I should have been tired, but instead, I felt this deep, humming peace. I thought back to that night in the garage, to the ache, the humiliation, the sound of Tasha's voice saying she needed the space. It all felt like a lifetime ago. I realized then that losing everything hadn't been a punishment. It had been preparation. Sometimes God doesn't take from you to hurt you. He takes to make room for something purer. Later, as I tucked Hope into her crib, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, she blinked up at me, half asleep, and mumbled, "Love you, Gamma." Sevens. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. That one little sentence carried generations inside it. Redemption, forgiveness, and the quiet proof that love really can start over. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Sleep tight, baby girl. You're the reason this old heart still beats strong." Sevens. And as I turned off the light, I knew I wasn't just closing the day. I was closing the chapter of being forgotten and opening the one where love finally learned my name again. Looking back now, I realized this story was never just about loss or revenge. It was about remembrance. Remembering who I was before the world told me I was too old, too tired, or too much. It was about learning that love doesn't mean letting people walk over you, and family isn't defined by blood, but by respect. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's this. You can forgive people without letting them keep hurting you. You can love deeply, give freely, and still draw a line that says, "I matter, too." Because forgiveness without self-respect isn't grace. It's surrender. Today, when I walk through my house and hear Hope's laughter echoing through the halls, I know every heartbreak had a purpose. Every sleepless night led me here, to peace, to pride, to a family that finally understands what love really means. So if you're watching this, or reading my story, I want to ask you something. Sevens. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your peace and pleasing the people you love? Think about that. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting for others. It's fighting for yourself. And if my story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own mother, your grandmother, or a woman who never stopped loving even when it hurt, do me a favor. Sevens. Tell me where you're from. Sevens. Leave a comment or a like if you felt something. Sevens. And share this story with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to take your power back. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve a love that sees our worth, starting with our own.